Our guest is obviously, you're seeing him already on screen, Timothy Alberino. So I hope you stay tuned. I'm sure this is going to be revealing what needs to be unfolding here before us in these unprecedented times: UFO, Nephilim, CERN, artificial intelligence, nanobots, hydrogels, ancient prophecies, lost cities of Atlantis, how this is going to impact the future. Something I wrote about in my last book on Masking the Future a few years ago. So, you know, when I met my friend Timothy some years back, straight away I thought this guy's like another Indiana Jones. He's an author, explorer, filmmaker, seeker of truth. Welcome to Spiritual Encounters, Timothy.
Oh, it's nice to finally be with you, Casper.
Yeah, it's been a while since we talked about doing this. So what an amazing time in history was observing things setting up for fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And it seems like those, you know, the far left, the evil weaselly guys, deliberately are sending out as much disinformation and misinformation across the internet, and they're doing a jolly good job of bringing in a lot of confusion. Of course, God is not the author of confusion. So love to get your take on what's going on. I'm sure you've been inundated, as I have, with people asking what's going to happen next.
Nobody knows what's going to happen next. Likely nothing in terms of, unfortunately, in my opinion, in terms of any justice being served. Obviously, the left is being very aggressive. They're moving very quickly, even quicker than I think most of us expected, to persecute conservatives. That's exactly what they're doing, is they're persecuting Trump supporters specifically, which is the vast majority of conservatives out there today. That was proven in the election this time around. And the scary thing is that there's this axis of evil that's formed between the left, the Democratic Party, between the corporations, and I think elements of the Pentagon, unfortunately, and obviously big tech. So really, what I wonder is who is on our side, who's on the side of conservative Christians anymore. The judges really aren't. I mean, there's still some defense of conservative principles happening in the courts. We've won some battles this year, lost some as well. And you add on to all of this chaos and tribulation that's now being perpetrated by the left. You add into that the whole COVID pandemic garbage, where they're just using this very survivable disease to take all of our freedoms away. So we are definitely seeing an acceleration of the left's plan, but it's much larger than just the left. Generally speaking, I think it's a globalist machination that was devised a long time ago, and the advent of Brexit and the election of Donald Trump caused them to have to really push the timetable forward. And they knew that Donald Trump was going to get reelected in an overwhelming landslide. About a year ago, last year at this time, it was indisputable Trump would be reelected. He could not be defeated. So they unleashed the pandemic. That's my opinion. In cooperation with, obviously, the CCP, with the Chinese Communist Party, and with elements of the deep state. And that might have sounded conspiratorial a year ago, but I think at this point it's pretty evident to a lot of people that that's what happened. And they've used this pandemic and now this insurrection at the Capitol to go headhunting for conservatives. Unfortunately, that's where we are.
Unfortunately, I do have to agree with you on that. I think we look back at 2016 and God's hand upon that particular time. And yet then we had Klaus Schwab and his Economic World Forum gathering together, obviously orchestrating what we've seen happen this past year, unleashing bioweapons and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think we really need to look at what we can do to encourage people at this point, especially, in the church. What can we do to help people stay on the narrow path of holiness?
Well, I think that the encouragement, you have to remember that the scriptures were written, the New Testament. Let me rephrase that. And actually, I was actually going to be correct on my original line of thought, but let's just talk about the New Testament for a moment. The New Testament was written during a time of really unprecedented tribulation for Christians. It was the height of the Roman Empire, and after the resurrection of Christ, when the gospel began to spread by the apostles, primarily by Paul in the Gentile nations, there were campaigns of persecution launched against the early church in the first century AD. Campaigns of systematic persecution. We all know that Christians were burned at the stake, were burned in the palace of the Roman emperors as Roman candles. That's where the term comes from, covered in tar and burned alive, and fed to lions. Women, children, men fed to lions in the Colosseum. So I don't think by any stretch of the imagination what we're seeing happen on the political landscape right now is not what I would consider persecution of the saints. This is political persecution. It will probably turn into, in the future, some kind of a persecution against Christians in general, which is what Christians in China have been facing, and in other parts of the world, Pakistan and Iran and other parts of the world, are facing really aggressive persecution, being imprisoned and so forth. So I think that we need to keep historical context when we get too depressed about the times in which we live, because believe me, this is the best time to live as a Christian in terms of being at peace and being able to lead a decent life if you live in the Western world. Most of history is tumultuous. We've lived in the last 200 plus years in the United States since our founding. We've been the exception to the rule. This is not the norm. The norm is not on earth. The norm is not peace and prosperity and plenty. It's not. The norm is chaos and war and famine and bloodshed. That's the norm on the earth. And so, I think that obviously the encouragement that we have as believers living in the 21st century in the United States and the Western world is the very same encouragement that the believers had in the early church in the first century AD when they were being persecuted by the Empire of Rome and by the Roman emperors, some of them absolute, like Nero, madmen who were just obsessed with persecuting Christians. Our hope is in the gospel, is in the knowledge that no matter what happens on earth, Christ has redeemed us and we will be reconciled to the Father, and that everything that was lost in Adam will be restored in Christ. That is the promise to the believer living in any age under any circumstances. So whatever's happening on the earth right now is temporary, it's transitory. Of course, we all want to live in the most peaceful times and be able to enjoy our lives and not be persecuted, not suffer any kind of persecution. That's natural. But the worse things get, the more people ought to laser focus onto the gospel and remember the hope of every believer is the resurrection and is the gospel of Christ in general, which is the greatest hope that anyone could ever imagine. So we have hope. We're the ones who have hope. Are the people who are perpetrating this fraud and perpetrating the wickedness on earth, they don't have any hope. They have no hope. Their hope is transitory. It's temporary. It's transient. And because their hope is for tomorrow. Their hope is to gain more riches, to gain more power. But our hope is eternal, and is much stronger than those who believe in Christ. Our hope and the glory of what's coming for us far outweighs any of the negative and any of the persecution that could come our way during our short lifespans on earth.
That's an excellent response. I think sometimes people forget that it's when the gospel is being persecuted, when people are being persecuted, and the Lord has some number of scriptures about that. Think, well, when that's happening, that's when the gospel of Christ spreads. They had incredibly diabolical plagues that were happening in ancient Roman times, and the pagan people would just throw their loved ones out onto the street to die. Mm-hmm. Christians that came along and nursed them back to health, prayed for them. Supernatural healings were taking place, and they got converted. Christianity spread. So
that's right.
You can't actually kill a Christian. All you can do is temporarily change our address for a little while. Then we're all coming back on flying white horses with the Lord Jesus.
Exactly. That's a good way to look at it.
I think maybe we should talk a little bit about. Everyone's focus is all political right now. It seems no matter where we look, people are all freaking out. People all over UK contacting me, through what's going on with this. The whole world's kind of watching. If America falls, so goes the world, kind of thing. But one of the main purposes, all the scientists behind CERN and the mission appears to me, they're trying to build a weapon to stop the Lord Jesus at Armageddon. And I think a lot of people's maybe not aware of what's really going on with the interdimensional portals and all that. The Pentagon keeps releasing more classified information every few weeks. Something's going on. Obviously, you're very well versed in those areas. Maybe we should kind of expound a little bit on that. Maybe that would give more clarity of how this is playing out, why these people that are serving the kingdom of darkness are trapped into that life.
I find that very intriguing that your perspective on CERN, because in fact I agree. I think that ultimately where this is all leading is exactly Armageddon. And I stress, and what I stress in my book and my perspective is that Armageddon is not a war with Israel. Armageddon is a war with Christ returning to the earth. That's what Armageddon is. And I have reasons why I say that in my book, and I lay that out. And so I agree. I think that where we're headed, generally speaking, now the ebb and flow of history is it's like a wave. It's got a wave pattern. There's ups and downs and times of tyranny, and then there's the Protestant Reformation, and then there's the Enlightenment and things like that, and then there's Maoist China. So the ebb and flow of history it's not a steady descent into worse times. It's actually very wave-like in its form. But generally speaking, all of this is ultimately going to conclude at Armageddon. That's where the nations. That's Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth and the rulers have set themselves against the Lord and His anointed, saying, "Let us break their bonds asunder and cast their cords away from us." That's where all of this is headed. In other words, humanity, at some point, which I think at that time will probably be post-humanity, is going to literally wage war with God, and that's almost at the very closing chapters of the book. And by the book, of course, I'm referencing the Hebrew Scriptures. That mankind at the end of the age is going to rise up against God Himself, and specifically against the return of His anointed Son, who's coming back as the rightful ruler of the earth. And that's the culminating event of human history, the return of Christ. And that is the thing that the enemies of God are always working to forestall, is the return of the King. The devil and his angels know that Christ is coming. Satan could not stop Christ from redeeming us and rising from the dead, and now is seated at the right hand of the Father. He couldn't stop that from happening. As much as he tried, he could not stop the birth of Christ. He tried all throughout biblical history. He attempted to foil what I call the dragon slayer prophecy, which other people call the seed prophecy, that the seed of the woman would basically crush his head. And so this has been the machination of the dragon This has been the dragon's machinations from day one, has been to foil the coming of Christ. When he failed to do that, he only has one. He only has one. There's only one contingency left for the enemy at this point, and that is to prepare for war, because Christ is going to return with armies, and he's not just returning with the armies of heaven to fight against mortal men. I think that the scene at the end of the age isn't going to be the nations gathered together pointing the gun barrels of their tanks into the sky. I think what we're talking about is exceedingly advanced technology that's going to be brought to bear, right? So you have to ask the question, when you realize that Psalm 2 is a war with God, and this is what Armageddon is, you have to ask the question, what kind of weapons do men bring to a war with God? I mean, it seems ludicrous. And of course, the Lord's response in Psalm 2 is he who sits in the heavens laughs. This is the Lord's response to the nations rising up against him and saying, we're going to cast your cords, we're going to break your bonds and cast your cords asunder. We are going to have war with you. The nations will know that Christ is returning. And so what kind of weapons do you bring in a war with God? I think is exactly what you just alluded to with CERN. The kind of weaponry I think that they're trying to develop. And by the way, it's not just what kind of weapons do you bring to a war with God. It's what emboldens humanity to go to war with God in the first place. That's also a very interesting question. And the answer to that is the gods are emboldening humanity to go to war with God. So in other words, there's going to be a situation on earth at the end of the age in which the gods are walking openly among men, leading us into war against this imposter, the God of the Hebrew God, who's actually an imposter, a tyrant. See, that's Luciferianism. Luciferianism is the Bible upside down. It's the inversion of the scriptures. It's Yahweh is a tyrant, Yahweh enslaved mankind, and Lucifer enlighten mankind and is freeing mankind from the bondage of this tyrant and his crucified son, as Nietzsche and Crowley contemptuously referred to Christ, the crucified son, as if Jesus being crucified was a defeat rather than a victory. And so that's their perspective, and that's the end of that. In my perspective, is what the end of the age is going to look like. So you just triggered me with your CERN weapons reference.
Well, as I studied like you and researching over the years, came across things like Oppenheimer in his Manhattan Project, and when he designated the hydrogen bomb the first time, one of his students apparently said something along the lines of, "How does it feel to be the first man in the world to set off an atomic bomb?" And he said, "I'm the first man this side of the flood." So then we go back and we look at what was going on with the whole Nephilim thing that was happening, and the advanced technologies that I don't think we've uncovered yet from what was going on back then. As you are preparing to answer that, Revelation 9, where we get information about the bottomless pit and Abaddon, Apollyon. After that, it talks about the woe is past. Behold, there's two more woes, coming hereafter. So I'm thinking like maybe we're at that point as well.
In terms of timetables, I'm not really sure where we are. I do know this. I do know that Jesus said that these things would come to pass at the end of the age. And this is what the disciples also, the apostles also spoke of, the end of the age. So then the question becomes, what is an age? What is an age? Because obviously there's this thing called an age. It has a fixed time frame. And when we come to the end of it, we can expect the return of Christ. Now, even knowing what an age is, you still can't pinpoint an exact day, because the end of the age could be the very last day of the age, or it could be 100 years before the conclusion of the end of the age, because it's still technically the end of the age. So what is an age? And there's really only one answer. There's really only one answer. It's not really up for debate. The question is, it pertains to what an age is, because the ancients knew what the ages were. There was no confusion. And going all the way back to, I believe, into the far end, from the beginning, from Adam. I believe Adam, this was established with Adam. We have to remember, before I say this, that it's God who tells us that the stars and the celestial bodies are for times and seasons, for understanding, keeping time, for understanding times and seasons. The moon and the sun certainly also apply. So we know that the heavens work like a clock, and that there's a hand that's ticking away. And for those who understand the times and the seasons, you can get a feel for what age you're living in. And so when you look into, there's a phenomenon that is, as a researcher, that I actually was astounded by when I was a green researcher, when I first got into all of this many years ago, that you encounter the same astronomical signs, which are also astrological, but astronomical signs in every culture on Earth, basically understands and keeps the same time. And in the pagan world calls this the zodiac, whereas the Hebrews called it the Mazzaroth. And the Mazzaroth is exactly the same. It's the same figures. It's the same constellations. So this is a very, very, very ancient timepiece. And it works on what's called precession of the equinoxes. We don't have to get into that. But the ancients were calculating the ages. They knew exactly what age they were in. We happen to be in the age of Pisces. Again, according to the Mazzaroth, we are in the age of Pisces, which makes perfect sense to me. I believe that the age of Pisces began at the birth of Christ. And that makes sense, that it's the symbol of Pisces is, of course, a fish. The symbol of the early church was a fish, for many reasons pertaining to Christ. So, and it's generally speaking, it's representative in the Christian world. The fish is representative of Christ and the Christian faith. And so I believe that the age began. This is a long-winded answer, but I believe that the age began, that the age of Pisces began at the birth of Christ. And if I'm correct, it may not be, we are certainly in the age of Pisces. There's no question about that. But if it began at the birth of Christ, which many people believe, even astronomers believe that it began at the birth of Christ, then we know that an age, a precessional age, is basically 2,400 years. So that tells me that, or 2,200 years. So that tells me that we are, in astronomical terms, very close to the end of the age, no matter how you look at it. But does that mean that the end of the age is going to happen tomorrow or in 200 to 300 years from now? Because even if the end of the age is 300 years from now, we're still at the end of the age. And so I would say, I think I can say with confidence that we are in the end of the age, but I don't have the confidence that the return of Christ is imminent, in the sense that it's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm more inclined to think that there are some things that have to unfold on the earth that are going to require time. And so we're probably looking at, from my estimation, anywhere from 100 to 300 years before that event. But that's just my own personal perspective on that.
Yeah, from all the research I've done, it occurs to me, the UN Agenda 2030 and the whole Gates of Hell Foundation vaccination thing. The Lord said, unless those days be shortened, there'll be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, hallelujah, those days will be shortened. Well, they're planning on having everybody microchipped, brain implants before 2030. So that's the end of this decade. Anthony Levinovsky, people like the Silicon Valley are talking about, well, he's already started, the Church of Artificial Intelligence some years back, and saying things like, if we've got something that's, you know, a billion gazillion times smarter than the smartest, you know, person in the world. Let's like taking, you know, the D waves and putting 7 billion people together all at once, accessing their thoughts. You know, you have Kurzweil, you've got a number of people saying artificial intelligence will be self-aware in the next couple of years. So, you know, why do we kind of put that in perspective? I think that, you know, kind of a lot of times I feel like we've been involuntarily drafted into an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Definitely.
But nevertheless, we've got to deal with these things. And I think one of the questions I really want to ask you is, we know what happened in Iraq with the undercovering, you know, Gilgamesh, and I mean, it's, you know, you can watch it on the History Channel. Why the armed forces went right to the museum, just like they did with the Spirit of Destiny, but the days of Hitler. But here, so that my question would be, you know, would the final dictator be AI? The scriptures are talking about, you know, the Antichrist with metal bits, metal teeth, all that. Are we going to look at a kind of a return of Nimrod here? What do you think might be going on with that?
Let me correct what I said before. The processional age, astronomical age, is exactly 2,160 years. So just for those who are checking on that, it's 2,160 years astronomical age, which I believe began at the birth of Christ. First of all, a little bit of commentary on Ray Kurzweil and some of the futurist predictions that have been made in the last decade, because futurists were making all kinds of predictions about a decade ago, definitely 2 decades ago, making all kinds of predictions. Most of their predictions were actually way off. Most of them predicted that we would be a lot further along down that line, that we would be more technologically advanced in some ways than we actually are today. In fact, most predictions predicted that most predictions foresaw the year 2020, the year 2021, where we are now, as a time in which we would already be implanting, for example, we would already be implanting chips into our cerebral cortex. We would already be interfacing with the internet with our minds. The technological singularity would be either here or right around the corner. We would have made already great advancements, great leaps and bounds in nanotechnology. So actually, it almost seems like Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns has actually slowed down. Their predictions, again, have not been very accurate in terms of time. So I think it's probably evidently going to take longer than people have predicted for some of these technologies to really advance at the pace that they were originally thinking. And there's reasons for that. I think a lot of these futurists only think in terms of technology. They don't think in terms of the politics and the roadblocks associated with society that slow that technology down. It's hard for guys like Ray Kurzweil and Musk. I forgot his first name. It's not Elon. How do you forget the name Elon? Elon Musk. It's hard for those guys to imagine that there are people not as excited as they are about the prospect of uploading your consciousness to a computer, for example, or interfacing with the internet with your brain. So they're always projecting that things are going to change much more rapidly than they actually do, because society takes a long time for society to absorb the change. It's kind of like the old guard has to pass away, and then the new technologically hip generation moves the ball forward, and to some degree. So I think that we have a clear indication that these transhumanist technologies are not going to be developed as quickly as people had originally predicted, and that it is going to take time for society to fully accept our inevitable post-human future, because that's where all of this is going. We are headed into a post-human apocalypse is what I call it in the title of my book. Certainly a post-human paradigm. And so the technologies required to bring about these dramatic changes to our physiology and mind, body, and soul are being developed, and are being developed at a rapid pace, but they're not going to be ready tomorrow. And they're probably not going to be ready within the next 5 years. It's going to take, from my estimation, it's going to take some decades still to get to the point where human enhancement products are actually in the market. And because that's going to happen at some point. There's a market emerging right now. It's a futurist market of human enhancement products. And it's not just genetic stuff. It has to do with the GRIN technologies, as some people call them, the genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology. And then there's others. There's a bunch of others. That's just a generalization of the main streams in biotechnology. And these technologies are going to, each one of these streams is going to develop products for human enhancement. Without question. I mean, we're already seeing it on a very, very small scale, let's call it rudimentary level, which is the brain chips that we're already using for people with Alzheimer's. That's just kind of getting the foot in the door of where that's really headed, because where that's headed is not just to try and help people with Alzheimer's. Those chips are going to the cerebral cortex, and they're going to be used to augment your memory. They're going to be used to be able to, perhaps even in the future, just like in the Matrix, download information into your brain. So you can learn a language just by downloading it into the chip, and then the chip interfaces with your brain, and it helps your brain rapidly develop those neural pathways, or it creates artificial, or there's already artificial pathways networked into your brain that you can through which you can learn new languages, new abilities. Again, just like the Matrix. Not just like the Matrix, but something approximating the Matrix. So these technologies are going to take time to get to the market. And when they get to the market, that's when things are really going to accelerate. And in order for these technologies to get to the market, they have to pass the trials. And trials can be accelerated, just like we saw with the vaccine, with the coronavirus vaccine. It was greatly accelerated, the process of using this new technology, the mRNA vaccine, because of some of what the president did. He took down some of those barriers, working with the FDA and so forth, and those trials were able to happen at a much accelerated pace. So that will certainly be true with a lot of these technologies, especially the ones that are going to begin in the medical field. Most of these are going to begin in the medical field. Yeah. So as I was saying, there's technologies that are already being applied in the medical field, such as gene therapy, in which they repair your broken genes with your broken human genes with other human genes that are not broken. So they'll copy from somebody's genome, that specific gene that's correctly coded, and then paste it into your genome where the error is. And that's beginning to become pretty commonplace now. But it did take a while for gene therapy to sort of break through the rusted gates of bureaucracy and get into the trials and the medical trials, and now again it's pretty common it's having pretty good results. We're seeing pretty good results from gene therapy. So that's just one technology, one example of a genetic technology that's already in application, probably at your local hospital. And there are many, many, many more such technologies that are going to be coming out, that are going to be surfacing in the coming years. And so we're all going to be being exposed to these technological advances gradually. And in time, as I said, they're going to create a market, not just for curing cancer or something like that, but for human enhancement, for actually enhancing our physiology.
You know, I've got friends in prestigious universities that were running after this idea. I mean, they're already, most of them have genius LQs now, but they couldn't wait to get enhanced until they got saved, and now they're only part of it. I think one of the times you and I were doing a prophecy conference together, I recall sharing about, this is a couple of years back, sharing about mind-to-mind transfer, how they had taken primates and they had like a paraplegic primate, and they put in, you know, microchips, and suddenly it was able to reanimate all the limbs as if it had never been injured. So of course it's going to come in with like, this is such a great thing, but then there'll be a nefarious twist to the, I think, like some of the friends I have in medical research that are talking about the vaccinations, these with the nanobots and the hydrogel. Again, part of that is to control your mind. It's again, you know, mind control technologies which are already in place. So I think we're about out of time, but I want to encourage everybody to come and join us next week, because Tim will be back with us for part 2. So we'll see you here, there, in the air. God bless everyone.